Coming up on this episode of Crime Family. There was concerns that there was a serial killer on the loose in the area around the same time that she went missing. Just curious to know why he would say, "Oh, that's me in the sketch." Like, if that was me, I would be like, "Hell no, that's not me."
There's a serial killer on the loose, and they know he's operating in that area, and then you have a missing woman. Wouldn't you be just looking? It's kind of just like they were going through the motions of, we looked for her but couldn't find her, when really if they would have put any effort, they would have found her. So it does just kind of seem like they were just making it look like they were trying.
It's obviously worse when a police officer has to come to your house and say that your daughter has been found dead, but for you to find them yourself is probably more heartbreaking than anything I could ever imagine.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Crime Family. I'm your co-host AJ, and I'm here with my two sisters, Stephanie and Katie. And this week, Steph is going to be telling us all about a case that she's been looking into. This is one that I actually suggested for you, Steph. I thought it might be an interesting one for you to look into. It happened here in Toronto, and I know quite a bit about it, but thought it would be interesting for the podcast. So you can go into the case and let us know all about this one. What case is it first?
The case I'll be doing is the Tess Richey case. I had never heard about this case until AJ suggested it for me. And once I started doing some research, it's quite an interesting case. There's quite a bit to unload in this case, so I'm just gonna dive right in. So, Tess Richey was born in North Bay, Ontario, and she was the youngest of 5. She moved to Toronto when she was just 19. According to her sister Rachel, who was 8 years older than Tess, Tess loved life, she loved her dogs, and she loved her family. And her family, they were pretty close-knit family. Tess was also a kind-hearted and spirited person who wanted nothing but happiness in her life. When Tess moved to Toronto, she was a server, but her dream was to become a flight attendant. Tess wanted to travel the world, and she was taking a flight attendant course at Seneca College in Toronto. And her life was going pretty well. Like I said, she had a pretty good job, and she was going to college, and she was young and wanted that independent life. But unfortunately, her and her boyfriend had broke up in the fall of 2017, around November 23rd. And Tess was really devastated. Her sister Rachel was there to support her, and Rachel and Tess were very, very close. They were soulmates, according to Rachel. The day after her breakup, Tess and Rachel spent the whole day together. They talked about the breakup, they went shopping, and because Tess loved her dog, they went to a dog park. That evening, Rachel had made dinner and had to coax Tess into eating because Tess was still pretty upset about her breakup. And even though Tess was shaken up about her breakup, she was still making plans to go out that night with a friend that she knew from high school who just had moved to the same neighborhood. And her name was Riley, and suggested they go to this well-known drag bar called Cruise and Tangos. So Rachel's husband ordered an Uber for Tess so she could meet up with her friend downtown. But little did she know that this would be the last time she would see her sister. Tess arrived at the bar at around midnight, and it was a very packed bar. Tess texted her sister to let her know that she had arrived safely, and Rachel mentioned that Tess's phone was like her second friend. She never went anywhere without it. And she said even her ringtone was the theme song for the show American Horror Story. Kind of ironic as we get into this case a little bit more. Tess's friend Riley showed up shortly after, and the two had danced the night away and drank a lot. And because Tess was a small girl, she was a very lightweight and unsteady on her feet, so it didn't take her long to get drunk. In one of the security cameras that were at the club, you could see Tess and Riley heading to the dance floor. In this video, you can see a man following Tess and Riley to the dance floor, and this man was Kalen Schlater, who was a 21-year-old male, and he was known as a ladies' man. In the second clip, you can see him dancing with another guy right next to Tess and her friend. These videotapes are a key component to this case, as you will hear later on in the case. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about Kalen. Kalen was, like I said, was 21, and he was seen as a ladies' man, and he lived with his parents and his younger brother in Toronto. And after he graduated from high school, he went on to study mechanics at a post-secondary college. He was also into video games and sandstone carvings and board games and card games. So he seemed like a good person, not a violent person, and just like a person that kept to himself and like a well-educated human being. According to some footage of the bar, Kalen had arrived 15 minutes before Tess did at Cruise and Tangos, and he arrived after he was drinking at a friend's house, so he was pretty drunk when he got to Cruise and Tangos. And there's also footage of Riley and Tess together upstairs and downstairs and outside by the front door, but it did not show that Tess and Kalen had any interactions while inside the club. As the night goes on, they're dancing and having a good time. At around 2:15 in the morning, Tess and Riley were asked to leave the club because they were very intoxicated, and you can see Tess arguing with the bouncer. The bar was about to close anyways, and Tess and Riley were having a smoke outside while the crowd was exiting the club. At this time, Kalen was also exiting the club. Kalen was known to wait outside and lurk in the crowd for groups of girls and would strike up conversations to find someone to sleep with. So about 5 minutes after the girls were asked to leave the club, they are seen walking down Church Street heading northbound, but they disappear out of the camera view. As they continue to walk, you can see in the video cameras that Kalen looks in their direction, and after he finishes the conversation, he heads in the same direction as Tess and Riley. And at this point, Tess is wanting to go home, so she tries to flag down a cab. And at this point, Kalen had caught up to Tess and Riley and had struck up a conversation with them. So when Tess flags down a cab, Kalen kind of convinced them to keep walking, and they want to go find something to eat. So Tess just waves off the cab, and they're heading down Wellesley to get a hot dog. In this footage, you can see them walking down towards a hot dog stand. And as they were walking, a witness named Michelle Teep, who lived 2 doors down from the intersection of Church Street, said she heard some commotion at around 3 a.m. on November 25th, the same night as Tess and Kalen and Riley were out. She then looks over and said she saw Tess, Kalen, and Riley walking down the street. She says she hears them laughing, and it seems like they were running from something. And she was actually right, because Riley had just sprayed mustard all over the hot dog cart. She could see the hot dog vendor and the damage that Riley did. Teep then says that Tess said sorry to her for making too much noise, but Michelle Teep said it was okay, and that so they started to sit down and have a conversation. Michelle noticed that they were pretty intoxicated. So Tess and Riley introduced themselves, but she said that Kalen just stood there and only said hi in a shy voice, and that he didn't really talk to Michelle that much. The conversation lasted about 20 minutes, and at this point, Riley had told Tess that she wanted to leave, and this kind of made Tess upset because Tess wasn't ready to go home. And according to Michelle, Kalen said, quote, "I've got this, it will be okay." There are some videos showing that Riley's walking westbound on Dundonald Street away from the direction of Tess and Kalen, so she's leaving to go home. And I guess there was an argument. Riley wanted to go home at this point, but Tess didn't want to. But Riley just left anyways. And this was around 4 a.m. And so at this point, Tess also decides that, well, since Riley's leaving, I would like to leave too. So she flags down a taxi again, but Kaylin waves off the taxi because it was holding up traffic. So I guess it was really busy where they were, and for them to get into a cab, it just, I guess, was holding up traffic. Tess and Kaylin walked a little bit more, and then Tess seemed to be still quite a bit upset about the argument she had with Riley before she left. And it was at this point around 4:02 that Tess calls an Uber. And the Uber showed up at 4:15, but Tess did not. And the next video shows Tess and Kaylin walking hand in hand towards a small stairwell, and you see them both going into the stairwell. You can see in the video that Kaylin walks back up the stairs, but Tess doesn't come up the stairs with him. And this was the last time anyone has seen Tess alive. So before I go any further, do you guys have any comments? Or when I was doing this research for this case, I was amazed about all the video footage that was out there, because you could see Kaylin and Tess pretty much throughout the night leading up to the horrible incident that I'm about to tell you about.
What was the stairwell leading to? Was it a house? Was it apartment? Could it have been a building that she went into and went out like a back door or something?
It was a house that was under renovations.
There was like a concrete stairwell that, like, at the bottom there was like a door that I'm assuming was just locked. So maybe it like led to a basement of some type in this building.
Oh, so she couldn't have gone in and gone out a different door?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, because in the video, if you look closely, you can just see, like, it shows the house and then it shows the stairwell, and you can kind of see, like, it just kind of ends at the bottom of the stairwell. And there's just, yeah, that gauge that there's a door there, but I'm assuming it didn't open.
I'm wondering what the purpose would be for them to go to that little stairwell that didn't lead to anything. You know what I mean? Like, what were they thinking of going to this little stairwell? I'd be curious to know.
I think also important to know that all this is like surveillance footage, which was just recovered after the fact, like in the course of the investigation into the case. So these were just surveillance footage that must have just been captured from, you know, businesses or whatever, right? Like all the surveillance footage, because they were downtown. Like this bar they're at is like a big populated, like busy downtown area. So all of the stores would have surveillance footage. So this is kind of the trail that they were able to piece together, or the story they were able to piece together based on the witness, Michelle Teep, that they kind of came across after leaving the bar, and then all of these little different surveillance footage along their route. So that's kind of how they sort of pieced it together. But that was sort of after the fact, during the course of the investigation, obviously, because no one was like, it's like 4 a.m, no one's at the store seeing this for themselves at the time. So this is all stuff that came out later.
One of my biggest things when I was researching this case and reading about Tess was that, like, I couldn't imagine just her friend just leaving her there with this guy that they just met at the bar. I mean, I know a lot of people do that and nothing ever happens to them, but like, to me, for her just to leave when they went together, they could have went home together.
Speaking from my own experience, we've gone to the bar with like a group of friends, and one of them breaks off because they meet somebody. That happens almost every time. It used to happen, I mean. And so I don't think it's that strange or uncommon for her to just leave her with some guy that she met, because it happens all the time, and it's happened to, you know, people that I've been with. So, and especially at that age, you just don't think of the dangers. And especially when you're drunk, you're just thinking, have a good time, you know, see you later kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of expected. Like, if you go with a group, not everyone's going to leave as a group, kind of. Or at least when she was 19 or whatever. Like, yeah, like Katie said. At that young age, it's especially true, I feel.
Yeah, and I mean, Steph, you know, when we would go down, there'd be this one specific friend that would come with us and wouldn't even meet somebody, but would just kind of leave on his own and kind of run to McDonald's and then run home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every time. And it was just like expected, okay, he's gone, we know where he is, and, you know, so that kind of thing just goes through your mind. It's kind of like, oh, I met who they're going with, or I know what they're going to do, and you just expect that it's going to be fine.
AJ, she wasn't 19 when she went missing.
Oh.
She was
whatever.
22.
She was young. But yeah, she was still young. Still in like her early partying years, I feel.
Yeah.
Early 20s.
So the next morning, Tess's sister Rachel texts Tess, but she doesn't expect an answer right away because she knew that Tess was out all night and she's probably hungover and that she's probably just sleeping. But when she didn't hear from her after 6 p.m., that's when she started to get worried. Rachel says that it wasn't normal for Tess not to answer her phone because she was always in contact with her sisters and other family members. And when they didn't find her at her apartment, that's when panic set in. And when the police were called for like a missing persons report, and when the police turned up nothing after their search, that's when Tess's mom and one of her other sisters had decided to travel to North Bay and search themselves, because to them the police weren't really doing anything and they were searching but they couldn't find her. Tess's case only started to get widespread attention after Rachel, Tess's sister, traveled across the province to search for her. And it was then that people really started to know that she was missing. You see, after Tess's mother came down and searched for her daughter, after putting flyers up all around Toronto, it was actually Tess's mother and our family friend that had found Tess in the stairwell just 40 meters away from where she was last seen. Of course, this put a lot of people in a frenzy because at the time the police were quickly criticized for their failure in finding Tess. Anyways, and the weird part of this whole searching for Tess was that like the police were in the same location just 3 days earlier and they didn't find her body. Like they didn't see her body or whatever. So I'm not sure. Like obviously their searching tactics weren't up to speed.
Well, yeah, it's so like it was so weird because I remember like obviously I lived here at the time and I think it was like pretty like it was kind of all over the news, or people were aware that she was missing for however long. She wasn't missing that long really, right before her mother found her. Like it was kind of a short, wasn't a super long time, but anyway, that was the whole kind of the thing about the case, was that it was ended up being her mother that found her. But supposedly the police had checked in this area, but obviously they didn't check very hard. Like she's at the bottom of the stairwell, yes, but you know, you just kind of walk a few feet off the sidewalk and peer down that stairwell, you'll see her. I mean, her mother was able to find her and she's not a trained searcher. So, I mean, the police who are trained and looking in that area couldn't have looked very hard, obviously. But their whole thing was like, well, they searched and didn't find her, so.
Do they know that she had been there the whole time? Could it have been a coincidence that that's where she was last seen, but maybe she left and then the police did search, but then she happened to end up there again? Do they know that that wasn't the case?
Well, I mean, I guess at the time, they didn't. I mean, Steph will go into it a little bit more, but I feel like at the time, I don't think that was in their minds, or maybe it was, but I think the kind of the narrative was that the police are just incompetent and just didn't search hard enough. Because like I said, the surveillance footage and stuff came out after. So she was found in the stairwell, and then it was the surveillance footage found later that showed them going into the stairwell. So I think people kind of just assumed that she had been there the whole time. So I don't really know if...
Well, yeah, I guess if they saw footage and they just never saw her coming out of the stairwell, and then she's found in the stairwell, she obviously hadn't left and come back. So I guess that answers that. Is this kind of like an example of the police just thinking that she's a 21-year-old girl? She was out drinking, partying, she went on a bender or met somebody and she's just with them, so they weren't really thinking it was that serious? Is that kind of what they were thinking as well, maybe?
Yeah, it was kind of speculated that like the police, like what you said, they were thinking like, yeah, she was just out partying, that she's probably just at somebody's house sleeping it off and just hasn't contacted anyone yet. But obviously that wasn't the case when her mother found her in the bottom of the stairwell. And I couldn't imagine like having to find your own daughter. It's obviously worse when a police officer has to come to your house and say that your daughter has been found dead, but for you to find them yourself is probably more heartbreaking than anything I could ever imagine.
I think it's a fine line too, because like you said, the police could just assume that she's a 22-year-old, she's just partying, she'll be back. So it's a kind of a fine line of like, you can't put all these police resources into looking into every single person who doesn't answer their texts within 12 hours of last being seen, like, because most of those people will turn up, or you know, even if it's a couple of days, you know, they just say, well, they always turn up, or you know, it ends up being nothing. So you have to kind of walk that line of you can't investigate every little thing, but then also you can't not look into every little thing. But it's only a kind of retrospect now that since we know what happened in this case, or we'll know what happened, that obviously they should have been put more effort into it. But I guess at the time, I don't know, they were just calculate, or you take the, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like they were kind of how do you know that this one is any different until you know that it was different?
Yeah, I guess when you think about it, I guess 9 times out of 10 it does turn up that the person was just sleeping it off or didn't want to answer their phone for whatever reason. But I think the fact that the police were in the area and didn't see the body, or didn't care to look hard enough, and then her mother had to come and kind of do that job for them, is, I think, super heartbreaking.
Yeah. They're putting on this act as if that they were really caring and that they did everything right, when like obviously they weren't. If her mother was able to come and retrace her steps, like she's an amateur like detective, or not even a detective, right? Like she's just logically following the steps that she knows that, from the bar that she was last at, and she's able to find her relatively quickly. So if she's able to do that, and like these trained police officers aren't even able to, then obviously they put no effort in at all.
It's kind of just like they were going through the motions of, we looked for her but couldn't find her, when really if they would have put any effort they would have found her. So it does just kind of seem like they were just making it look like they were trying.
So those police officers who were criticized for failing to find Tess were eventually charged with misconduct for neglect of duty under the Police Service Act. So they did get charged for not canvassing the neighborhood thoroughly and doing their job properly. And going back to when Tess's mom found her, she knew it was her daughter right away. She was obviously the mother, and you should know your children. But she describes that she knew it was Tess's body laying at the bottom of the stairs because Tess had this black sweater on with high heels and fishnet stockings, and her purple purse was next to her, as well as her pink polka dot phone. That her phone was one thing that she never left home without. And she was also covered in soot from a pile of gravel that was next to her body. So the body was just like laying there for, I guess if you're just walking by, you might not have seen the body, but I mean,
yeah. And I'm thinking, because this was November, right, in Toronto, it was probably very cold, so it probably would have preserved the body more than if it was in the middle of summer, where you probably would have been able to smell it, or there would have been like flies around it faster than November. So that probably, helped with the concealing of it, I think.
Mm-hmm. So after those police were charged with misconduct, the police department put a team together to create a missing persons unit. When this team was created, it didn't take long for the murder investigation to start. And at this time, the only suspect that they had was Kaylin Schlater, because he was the last person to see her alive, and you can see in the footage that they both go into that stairwell and he's the only one that comes out. At this time, the police believed that he sexually assaulted her and then strangled her. So the sexual assault and the strangulation was just speculation, because at that time there was no autopsy done on Tess yet, so they were just trying to piece together what could have happened to Tess. So because Kaylin was one of those people who liked to go out quite often to pick up girls and go to clubs and stuff, according to an article that I read, Kaylin at one point had told an undercover cop that he liked going to gay bars to find people to have sex with, and that he knew that women also go there as well. And according to some video footage, you can see Kaylin, like I said earlier, arriving at the Cruise and Tangos. At this point, they're looking for the last person to see Tess alive, and they put out a sketch of this person that they believe was the last person to see Tess. And Kaylin had called in to say, like, yes, that was him in the sketch. I mean, I feel like, I don't know why he would, like, oh yeah, that's me. Anyways, but that's what, according to the article that I read, he was the one who called in to say, yeah, that was me in the sketch.
Wait, did they think it was him before and he was just confirming, or did he step up out of nowhere and was like, that's me?
Well, the video footage of him coming out of the stairwell, they didn't have his name, but they knew, like, they had, like, what he looked like.
So they found the surveillance footage, and then they made a sketch based on that surveillance footage.
Oh, okay. And then he came forward and was like, that's me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So on December 10th, during a press conference, they showed some video footage of a man last seen with Tess. And then around 9 that night, Kaylin calls 911 and says that he is the man in those images. And then the officers then went to his house and placed him under investigation detention. So not, I guess, arrest, but not arrest, I guess. So the police wanted to do an undercover operation on Kaylin, and they wanted to watch him over the course of several weeks, but they were concerned for the public safety. I guess after he was taken into custody, he was let go, I guess, and they wanted to do a operation on him, but they were concerned for the public safety because of the violence of the crime. They just ended up arresting him on February 4th, 2018, and he was placed in his holding cell at 3:15 a.m. And his parents, because he lived with his parents, went down to the jail cell and gave him like food and drinks to like calm him down. I mean, seems awfully.
Wait, you're allowed to do that? Give people food when they're in jail?
That's what it said in the article I was reading. I'm like, what? Yeah, they gave him food and drinks.
Oh.
Because at the time, like, he was arrested and charged, but there was no, like, he wasn't sentenced to anything, like.
Oh, yeah, maybe you're allowed to do that just in, like, the holding cells and, like, not actual prison, just jail. Okay.
Once he was in the holding cell, the autopsy was complete and it revealed that Tess died from neck compressions. So this showed that, obviously, she was strangled. And that's when he was charged with second-degree murder. And at the time of his arrest, he also had no police record. And when information comes out that Slater was arrested, it was then that the Global News also released information that Kaylin Slater had witnessed an attempted murder back in August of 2017, when a man attacked his neighbor with a hammer, and Kaylin claims he had tried to intervene and help the injured person. So it kind of goes show that he was in a similar situation prior to Tess's murder. But this all came out after he was arrested, like all of this information.
Except he was helping in that scenario.
Yes. He was helping.
Yeah, and not helping in this scenario.
Yeah.
Was he actually helping though?
Well, that's what he says, I guess.
Yeah, that was according to a Global Mail article that they did an interview with. But I mean, that's, like, he witnessed it, so that's just him. Like, that's kind of hearsay. Like, I don't think there was actually any investigation into that.
Well, did that person die that he was helping?
It didn't say. He just said he was injured. So the investigators who were working on Tess's case believed that Kaylin and Tess first met on the night she was killed, and that her death was a crime of opportunity. And so on March 21st, the charges were upgraded from second-degree murder to first-degree murder after new evidence was found. The trial was supposed to last about 6 weeks, but there was concern at the time because of the COVID pandemic. And at the time, all the Ontario court proceedings were adjourned for months, but Justice Michael Dambort offered the people who were proceeding in the case if they wanted to continue or wait for a later date, but they all chose to continue. So on March 23rd, 2020, Slater was found guilty of first-degree murder. And that's how it ends. But he was found guilty on March 23rd. But when Tess first went missing, this all came out after he was found guilty, but when Tess was first went missing, there was concerns that there was a serial killer on the loose in the area around the same time that she went missing. And that serial killer was known today as Bruce MacArthur. So he was known to frequent that area of where Tess was murdered, because that's where the gay bar was that she went to, and we all know who Bruce MacArthur is, right?
Yeah, Bruce MacArthur killed gay men, though, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yes. After she went missing, as there was concerns that there was a serial killer on the loose in that area at the same time, but they didn't know it was Bruce MacArthur until like a little bit later.
Well, because like there had been like the long investigation, because there had been a series of gay men who were found murdered or missing, who were missing from that area of the city, and then I guess that they were maybe zeroing in on Bruce MacArthur at that time, because that was in November of 2017, and then Bruce was arrested in January of 2018, which would have been only like a month or 2 months after Tess died. So that was kind of happening at the same time as the Bruce MacArthur investigation. And so, yeah, I guess maybe people thought, but I think that kind of came into it because people thought that maybe their resources were just strapped because they were so focused on Bruce MacArthur that they didn't have the resources to focus on. That's
what I was going to say. I think when they were looking for Tess at the time, they were preoccupied with the Bruce MacArthur case. They were trying to hone in on a serial killer, and then they had this murder on top of that. So, I mean, yes, they did some shady search work locating her body, but I mean, Toronto police of Toronto, like, they have a lot on the go probably every day, so, but that still doesn't excuse them for not searching for her the right way.
Yeah, I guess it kind of, if you are thinking their mindset, it's like we already have a serial killer, and then there's this girl that was out partying and she's missing, so, and that kind of, like we were saying before, they're not that concerned because she's probably just out partying, sleeping somewhere, and they also have a serial killer that they're thinking about. So that's, I can definitely see why this was not a priority for them, even though, of course, like you said, that doesn't excuse their shoddy police work. So you had mentioned earlier that more evidence had come out, and that's ultimately why Kaylin was convicted. So I'm just curious what other evidence was there.
Yeah, so according to Kaylin, during his trial, he said that he and Tess went down that stairwell to make out, and that Kaylin wanted to have sex with Tess, but Tess said no because she was on her period that night. He then claims that he ejaculated on his pants and was a little bit embarrassed about it as he tells his story in the courtroom. And according to the forensic evidence, there was semen on the upper part of Tess's pants and saliva on her bra. Kaylin then goes on to say that he invited Tess back to his parents' place and was telling her that he had a very cool family and that he really wanted her to meet his family. But Tess denied his offer and told him to leave, and she pulled out her phone, and about 45 minutes later you can see Kaylin walk out of the stairwell, but Tess did not. So obviously there was some type of assault or disagreement because she didn't want to go back to his house, or she didn't want to have sex with him, or whatever the case may be. So you can tell, like, there was a violent, like, he just was embarrassed or didn't like the fact that she was rejecting him, didn't like rejection, but obviously he got mad and very violent towards her. So that's the evidence that came forward. And that's what his story of why they went to the stairwell, and then the forensic evidence came out. Like, so DNA evidence.
Yeah, it's like they had literally had him on video. They're tracking his entire night, plus the DNA evidence that they found on her body. So those two things together, it was like indisputable, really.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember you said earlier that he was considered a ladies' man or whatever, so probably he wasn't used to rejection, so maybe that was what kind of tipped him off there. Also, I'm surprised that he wanted to take her back to his parents' house. Like, who wants to go meet some random dude's parents at 4 a.m? So yeah, definitely agree with her on that one. So yeah, that's just, it's super, it's almost like an open and shut case. Like, there was evidence they saw him in the stairwell, and then she just never came out. And yeah.
It's interesting too, because you said that he turned himself in to the police because saying he was the person in that sketch, or he didn't turn himself in, but he said that he was the person in the sketch. But the only reason that they had those sketches was because they saw the person that matched that description in the surveillance footage. So, I mean, they have the DNA evidence, so even without that surveillance footage, they would still have that DNA evidence, but they wouldn't have been able to necessarily tie it to... They still wouldn't have known who that DNA necessarily belonged to if he didn't have a record, you know, if he wasn't in the system. So that sketch from that footage, along with the DNA evidence, really...
And a lot of the video footages that we're seeing, like, throughout the night, were kind of what open and close the case, because you could see him with Tess and Riley the whole entire night, and then you have like the witness of Michelle Teep. So there was all kinds of people seeing Kaylin with Tess and Riley, so it was kind of like he couldn't escape from the murder that he did because there was so much like physical evidence out there.
Well, yeah, and also normally when there's this kind of thing, for whatever reason, the video cameras just happen to not be working in that location, or they could see them walking, but then the camera that's pointed at the alley doesn't work. But in this case, everything worked out. Well, it worked against him, but worked out for like justice for the family. So that's not something we see all the time.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And like, I guess it wasn't even necessarily, because I just looked at a picture, it wasn't even like an alley really. It was like just a house along the side, along the street, but it was like kind of back. I don't know, I guess it's hard to explain. It wasn't really an alley though, because maybe it's like, the point being, it's like, it's not necessarily, you wouldn't suspect there to be a random security camera on this house, because it just looked like a house that maybe had a little bit of like construction work being done. So it's not like it was an alley so it's not necessarily a place that you would suspect to have a security camera on you, which is why maybe he didn't think that there would be evidence of that, because he didn't think this random house would.
Sorry, I'm just curious to know why he would say, "Oh, that's me in the sketch." Like, if that was me, I'd be like, "Hell no, that's not me."
Yeah, I'm wondering if he knew that they got that sketch because of the video footage, or if the police were just like, this is who witnesses say that they saw with her, because he may not have known that there's an actual camera in that alley and that stairway. So maybe that's why he's just like, to make it not look as bad, because people saw him with her, that Tina woman. So he's like, yeah, I'll admit it. But also, yeah, I think without that footage, because I mean, even if his DNA was on her, that could still be kind of circumstantial and be like, yeah, well, we did get together, but then I left. And there's no proof that he was the last one to see her without that footage. So I feel like that was definitely the nail in his coffin for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to send you actually a picture from what the house looked like, or what the area looked like, because I think it's easier to think about it when you see it, obviously. So like, it wasn't like an alley, but like the stairwell was at that back, the part that's furthest back from the street, that little white part.
Oh, like the black door, kinda?
Yeah, I'm assuming that's the black door, but there's a stairwell going down from there.
Oh, okay.
Because like, it looks like there's a railing, right? Like there's that railing. Mm-hmm. But then there's also a picture of that on that same site I got this from, of what the stairwell looked like as well.
Okay. So yeah, I don't even know if you said it was an alley, but it kind of in my head pictured an alley, but this really is just a kind of a space between two houses. There really isn't a way out. I
don't know, like if I was walking on the sidewalk there, like I wouldn't think of there being a security camera right there, necessarily. Because it just looks like, just a space between two houses, which...
But I think a lot of construction places, I mean, I know here in Halifax, they do have cameras just in case like some vandalism goes on or something happens or whatever during someone steals construction equipment. Like I feel like a lot of places would have surveillance cameras on their construction sites.
Right. Was this a construction site though, or was it just an abandoned house? Because if it wasn't a construction site and just some random house, you wouldn't, like AJ was saying, you wouldn't think there was a camera there.
Yeah. So like you're just thinking, oh, this is like a house, because it doesn't even really look like a construction site necessarily. I mean, yeah, there's like some boards, but I don't know.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, that fence it does kind of what they would put up, I think, for a construction site, but it doesn't. Yeah, your first thought would not be that's a construction site. Yeah, I guess like when you see that first picture, if you were the police that were supposedly looking for her, you kind of would have to go right up to that stairwell and look down to see her. So if they just kind of were walking along the sidewalk and looking down that little space, yeah, there's no way they would have seen her. You really had to, like, actually make an attempt to go down that way.
Yeah. And I guess it also makes sense, too, how, like, even before I saw this picture, I had it in my mind that it was actually closer to the street. Because I was like, how would someone not see it? But I guess you wouldn't really see the body at the bottom of the stairwell unless you go up to it, obviously. Because it's obviously not visible from the street. Because I thought it was closer to the sidewalk. And I was like, how is someone no one seeing this?
But if I'm a police officer and I, like, obviously do my job well, like, I'm gonna look at all the stairwells and all the...
Well, yeah, you're not just gonna walk by that area and be like, no, she's not there. You would, obviously, like her mother did, go down there and check. You wouldn't leave any space unturned because you never know.
Because her mother, like, obviously had no reason to think that she was in that specific stairwell, but she was just searching thoroughly in the area, which is something the police could easily do. You don't have to necessarily have reason to believe that that's the stairwell she's in. You don't know she's in a stairwell, but you're just looking in the area.
That's such a small, like, little space, and if you could tell, if he's like standing in that stairwell, she really couldn't get out because it's like that, the walls on both sides. It's like a really scary place for someone to go through that. It's definitely not an easy spot to get out of if someone's definitely, like, blocking your way. There's only one way out, and he obviously kept her from going out, so.
And it was November, so it would have been cold, so it probably would have been icy. Not that it would matter, but she could have, like, tried to get away but slipped or something. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's kind of like a weird case though, because like you said, it was open and shut because, like, unfortunately she was murdered, but then they found who did it so quickly because he kind of turned himself in, to be honest.
I think that's one interesting aspect is that he maybe didn't mean to. He was trying to maybe be cooperative by saying I was with her and that's me in the sketch, but not realizing that they actually had legit footage of them going in there together and her not coming out. And yeah, and I think the interesting but sad aspect that her mother had to be the one to find her definitely adds another layer of sadness to this case, I guess.
Because like what would have happened if her mother wasn't able to make it to Toronto as soon as she did to find her? Like, would the police have found her at all, or who else would have found her?
Yeah, like, how long would she have been there before somebody did find her? And then, yeah, by that time, maybe some of the DNA evidence wouldn't have been there if it was snow and stuff, right?
Yeah, like, you get a few snowstorms.
Could have been like a construction crew could have found her.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't, because it was like she was there for a few days, but...
That's true.
Obviously, they weren't working there for the few days.
Yeah, it kind of makes you look like, though, because that fence, maybe they were inside that fenced area, and maybe they wouldn't have even had to go down to that stairwell at all. So yeah, who knows what the outcome would have been if her mother wasn't as persistent as she was.
Yes, parents of children or people go missing, like, you want to be persistent, you want to know, like, where your family member's at, and you want to try to find them, but, like, it's the police's job to find what happened to your family member. You're not supposed to find your daughter laying in the bottom of a stairwell. Like, that's not, like, you can go search for your daughter, but you're not the one who's supposed to find them. So that's supposed to be the police job. But they did get charged with misconduct, so.
I think they were just preoccupied, honestly, with everything else. With the Bruce McArthur case, because that was a huge investigation that took up most of their resources. So I don't think any case around that time got any of the attention it really deserved.
And that was, like, it wasn't that around the same area too, though? Like, the same...
Yeah, well, it was in, like, the village. It was, like, where all the gay bars are and stuff, because that's what the victims of Bruce McArthur were gay men from the village that went missing. And then this just happened to take place in the same area of the city around the same time that there was all of that word of that investigation. So people kind of lumped them in. Obviously, she doesn't fit the MO. She wasn't a gay man. But I think, I don't know, it just kind of all happened to take place at the same time, and that's why her mother had to be the one to find her, because the police just didn't give a shit, to be honest.
They didn't have the resources, I guess, to have someone search her, like, properly. But that doesn't matter. Like, you're police. You have to find other ways to do your job, and if you can't do it yourself, like, bring in other teams or bring other people in to help you. You can't just give up
They had all of their resources strapped on the Bruce MacArthur case, but even that one they botched many, many times. So they're just incompetent.
But I mean, there's a serial killer on the loose, and they know he's operating in that area, and then you have a missing woman. Wouldn't you be just looking, because you never know, like, she could be a victim of his, so why not just search your hardest, because you never know what you're going to find, rather than being like, well, you know, nothing probably happened to her, let's move on.
And that could help
why
you.
Not like, and you never know, like, sometimes serial killers do stray from their MO, so you just never know. Maybe she was with somebody, one of his, you know, somebody that he wanted, and she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe she saw something that he did, you know what I mean? So I mean, it's not that far-fetched to be like, oh, she could have been a victim, let's search for her, as if she was. Or just even, you know, even if she wasn't, you know, still search for her properly.
Exactly. And then there was also the body of a trans woman that was found around the same time as well, that they were looking into as possibly was a victim of Bruce MacArthur too. So all of these things were happening around the same time. And the Bruce MacArthur case, but I don't even know, I think they were like, these could possibly be tied to it, but they didn't really put any attention into those other two. They just kind of focused all on the victims that were suspected, like the gay men that were suspected to be victims of Bruce MacArthur versus Tess.
Yeah, and there was like speculation out there, like the police were speculating that maybe she was like an escort, or like stuff, like just random stuff like that. Like maybe she, like, do you know what I mean? Maybe she was one of those escorts that her parents didn't know about.
Oh yeah, maybe she put herself in that situation and it's not worthy of looking that hard for.
Yeah.
Because I think every 22-year-old who gets drunk, it just happens to be out somewhere gallivanting with somebody else. Like,
well, yeah, because that's what probably usually is what happens, but that doesn't mean you have to assume that that's what happened every single time.
And like, I try to, you know, you try to play devil's advocate or look at it from their perspective. It's like, we don't know the amount of missing person reports that they get in a day that end up being like nothing. You know what I mean? Like, obviously you don't hear about those ones because they don't turn into anything, but they probably get so many reports of a missing person, and then 24 hours later they're found, and they weren't actually missing at all. It was just, they were mad at their mother or something, right? And they just didn't, you know? So I feel like, I don't know. I feel like they get that so many times that it's eventually they might just kind of be in that mindset of like, well, we're not going to be really concerned until we have an actual reason to be. And they just didn't have that in this case until her mother found her body.
and I do feel bad for her friend Riley, because like she did leave her alone with Kaylin, even though Tess told, like, they had an argument because she was leaving. Like, if she would have just stayed, like, this whole case would never have happened. But I mean, you always wanted to say, like, what ifs.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we can't put any blame on Riley, because there's no way, obviously, she would have known. And you never know, something could have happened to her as well if she would have stayed. We don't know how overpowering he could have been for even two women, right? So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the Tess Richey case. And thank you so much for tuning in and listening. If you are a fan of the podcast, you can follow us on all the social medias at Crime Family Podcast on Instagram, Crime Family Pod 1 on Twitter, Crime Family Podcast on Facebook, and we do have a new website, crimefamilypodcast.ca. Definitely check us out there, where you can listen to full episodes, see transcripts, and you can leave us a voicemail if you'd like. You might be able to hear your voice on the podcast in the future. Thank you so much for listening, and we will be back next week with another case for you guys. Thank you for the support and loving the podcast and listening and all your feedback. We appreciate it, all the messages we get. You can also send us your case suggestions at crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com. If you hear of a case or you see a case that you really want us to cover, you think it would be interesting, just give us an email, or you can fill out the contact form on our website and let us know your case suggestion there as well. And yeah, we love hearing your feedback, and we're very happy you're enjoying the show and you're enjoying our third season. So thank you so much, and until next time, take care. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.